So hello again, everyone. We are now going to be talking about all things Cartus. So Simon, starting with you, can you tell us what Cartus means?
Yes, Cartus means hospitality, friendship in the Gaelic language. It actually was a recommendation from John's granny, who's a Gaelic speaker, and she recommended that there would be a great name for our whiskey because it reflects the islanders and the people at Laphroaig. Cartus, then the one I've got here, and it's pronounced Cartus exactly the way it's spelled. Cardeas. No, Cartus, like it's a gorgeous Cartus, or I get in a car chase for Cartus. Cartus, friendship.
Thank you very much, Simon. John, what was your favourite Cartus bottling produced?
I think that my favourite was probably the 2015 Cartus, just because, I don't know, I'm probably like everyone else where things are always better in the past. We are very kind of, I guess, I don't know, reflective, and we just feel these things. So I thought it took it 11 and a half years in the making as well. So we tried to recreate what we were producing in the early 1900s at Laphroaig, and whereby we only used 100% floor malted malt, heavy peated, up to 60, 65 ppm. We put it through the 3 small stills now, so numbers 2, 3, and 4, and it was balanced distillation as it would have been back then. And then we put it into ex-bourbon barrels and stored it through the wall in number 1 warehouse. So we were just trying to recreate a spirit from the past. Cartus wasn't even born at this time either, so it was just the perfect one though for our bicentenary. When Cartus became born in 2008, that had to be set aside for a 200-year anniversary Cartus.
John, a question for you, just in regards to Cartus. They are small batch, they are experiments. And do you find that there are some casks that are not quite ready for production and for bottling?
Yes, no, absolutely. And some take longer than others. So you're always, because we're working 5 years ahead, I'm always excited for the next one, but sometimes just leaving it that bit longer and sticking with the process, just kind of to your end, you sometimes get a better product. So we are always trying and experimenting, and it's kind of one of the fun things that I guess we get to do together every year, is to look at the Cartus experiments ongoing in the warehouse. And it's always great if you get to the fashion aisle as well, because sometimes we will show you how these things have continued to develop as well after they've been bottled, because we do keep 2 or 3 casks ongoing, just to see. It's always good to learn about the way the liquid performs and develops with other influences as well.
And those other influences being the wood type itself, the location of the warehouses, and the environment that the casks are maturing in.
Yes, totally. And as it decreases in volume, that more of the outside elements start to come in, and you get different chemical reactions happening. So just all of these factors build up into the mix of something that could be just awesome eventually.
So John, as we're on the subject of Cartus, could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to use port and wine for this year's Cartus?
Yes, so this year's Cartus, which got a bottle here, the port and wine cask. So in 2013, we did a portwood Cartus. It sold out within 6 days, which is a record for selling out Cartus, and that was 32,000 bottles, which is roughly about the volume we normally produce for a Cartus. It was just so popular, we just had to get it back into the cycle with a twist though. So this time it was refill port casks, and so to add a slight twist, we added in 15% 5-year bourbon, 3 years in red wine breaks. It's a double matured with the red wine side of things. So just to give it a slightly different twist. And I think it's come out really well with the refill portwood as well, because you definitely get Laphroaig when you taste this Cartius.
Thanks, John. It certainly seems to be popular so far. Just a little reminder, everyone, Cartius is an exclusive bottling for Friends of Laphroaig. You can purchase on our web shop at laphroaig.com, and it's also soon to be released in the US. We will also have stock available in our visitor centre when we reopen.
Well, that's good news. I can keep drinking some then. I was scared to keep going with this forever.
Absolutely.
Good.
So let's talk a little bit more about a couple of other products of Laphroaig. So John, this question's around the 10-year-old. Do you think it's changed in the past 10 years?
Yes, it has changed. What have we done? We have done a few things, not the cups, not anything. It's subtle differences in the background that have changed. So I think, like ourselves, as everything evolves slowly, and what I would say is we've tried, you listen to your consumers, and back in the 90s we introduced a lot of first fill bourbon, and so the edge or the power to Laphroaig got a little softer. So we have introduced some refill bourbons into the mix, and we increased the peating in 2006. So that's the two things. So you should be getting more peat and more, I guess, of that kind of iodine type flavours coming through rather than the vanillas, especially in the last few years, since 2016. So I think we always try and react to what our consumers are doing, and that's the great thing about having friends of Laphroaig. They are always telling me what I'm doing wrong. So it's just the other side of that is it takes 10 years to change things. So from when you start getting that feedback till the change comes, it's very, very slow. And equally, there's nothing wrong with Laphroaig. So my job is not to do wholesale changes in Laphroaig, just touch around the edges. And my main job is consistency. But small tweaks along the way to try and give consumers what they want as well.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, John. So Simon, we're going to talk a little bit about Laphroaig Lower. Could you tell us what age is Laphroaig Lower and why was the name Lower chosen?
There is no official age statement on the Lower. It is what we refer to as a no age statement whiskey. And many people believe that that's a new idea, but it's actually very traditional. When you look at in the 19th century, the whiskies were coming right from the distilleries and going right to market at distillation strength. And they were marrying different barrels to create different flavor profiles. If you look at the history of Laphroaig and Ian Hunter, our distillery manager at the turn of the century, he would have been using whatever barrels that were available. And it really wasn't until the 20th century that age became a factor in the maturation, in the selling and the promotion and the enjoyment of the whiskies. What they started to realize was that time in the barrel, it has additive as well as subtractive properties. The barrels breathe. During the summer, they expand and they force the whiskey into the wood, and in the winter, they contract and draw the whiskey back out. We're losing that 2% evaporation, the angel share, but also we're gaining from the wood itself. So the idea behind lore, again, when we talk about taking suggestions, recommendations from our friends of Laphroaig, every bottle of Laphroaig, it says the most richly flavored of all Scotch whiskies. And somebody had asked John, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you in terms of those rich flavors? So John decided to explore that notion of rich flavor in Laphroaig. Of course, he'd known about the flavors for years, but really, if you separate them, what are those flavors? And there were 4 key flavors that he had come up with: smoky peaty, dry, floral, and sweet. And so as a result, he set out to create a bottling that would encompass those 4 key flavors, that were personify, and at the same time recognize the history, the lore, the legends of the people who has come before him at Laphroaig. Whether it be Ian Hunter or the Johnston brothers, who were the farmers who started the distillery back in the late 18th century. Bessie Williamson, the woman that's always on John's shoulder through the years as his angel to make sure he doesn't screw it up. So lore encompasses 3 different types of casks. American oak, in 2 different sizes, quarter casks, 125-liter casks, and 200-liter casks. Oloroso sherry casks, and new European oak casks, that would be 11-year-old. But the majority of what we use are those American bourbon barrels, which are 15-year-old casks, American oak, and there's also some 20-plus-year-old American oak. And you get a variation of flavors. The smoky peaty comes from the young American oak. The dry comes from the quarter cask. You get floral notes from the European, and you get spicy sweet from the Oloroso, and you get fruit sweet from the 15-year and the 20-plus-year casks. It really pays tribute to the history of Laphroaig, and it is really one of the finest Laphroaigs to come along, and I think John's done a great job with this. There's a lovely sweetness to it, but there's also a little bit of dampness, what I like to call dank quality to it, that kind of in the warehouse kind of experience, but lovely fruit notes as well coming through in the 15-year. Lore is a really lovely whiskey, and a little bit more limited because we are using slightly older whiskies, so there it makes it a little bit rarer, but a beautiful whiskey and a great whiskey to enjoy and add to your collection. Laphroaig Lore.
Thanks very much, Simon. Lore's one of my personal favourites too. Really love the balance of young and old whiskies and the balance of wood flavours as well, with that sort of sherry sweetness. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about 18-year-old Laphroaig. As you know, we no longer produce the 18-year-old, and many people are still looking to seek a bottle of the 18-year-old. Will it ever be produced again, Simon?
At this point, there are no current plans for producing, bottling Laphroaig 18. But if you like that style, and we were just talking about lore, there are elements of those flavors that are that you can find in the lore bottling because of the 15 plus the 20 plus aged whiskies. The other one I would recommend as well, if you can get your hands on it, is the Laphroaig 16. That is similar in style, not quite the 18. The beauty of the maturation, and that's something that I'm privileged to work with John to be able to sample whiskies as they age through the years, and you see this ebb and flow of flavor with the woods, the way the barrels inhale and exhale. They also, those flavors will move up and down, and you get obviously lots of peat and smoke in the 10-year, in the classic 10-year, and then the fruit notes start to move to the front when you start moving into the teenage years for Laphroaig, and then 18-year. More of those bourbon notes come back again, the vanilla, the caramel, with a little bit of the smoke, and then as you move into the 20s. You get more of those fruit notes, but they start evolving into tropical fruit notes. So 18, it was a bottling for us that was kind of in between the fruit style flavor maturation that you're getting in the early teens and then in the mid 20s. Lovely whiskey, and as I said, at this time there are no plans for bringing it back, but never say never.
Thanks very much, Simon. That sounds like some great advice. So, John, there was lots of questions around batch 12 cask strength. Do you know when it will be available? And have you tasted it yet?
Pre-production samples, Emma. Yep, I've tasted some pre-production, but not. It's just different to the actual, when you get the actual bottle in your hand. But Yes, it's bottled. It's just waiting to get distributed. So it will be available very soon, I hope. And it it's hard to know right now because it's a different world right now, unfortunately. And so normal timescales, I guess, aren't normal right now. So we hope to get it available to folks very soon. We know it's very, very popular. We know a lot of people collect each batch and want to get their hands on it. But I'm sure you'll have some in the shop at the distillery, Emma. So if all else fails, when it's safe to do so, you just come to Isla and we'll keep you supplied with that cask.
Absolutely. Thanks,
And Emma,
John.
I would also like to mention that the 10-year cask strength batch number 12 is they are taking orders in the United States right now. So we should probably see it on the shelves in the United States, I would say within the next 6 to 8 weeks.
That's great. Thanks for that, Simon. We're excited to see it and taste it soon. Simon, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you tell us a wee bit more about what drives Laphroaig to produce non-age statement whisky?
Yes, the no age statement whiskies are harken back to a more traditional times. When you look at the history of whiskey production, particularly in the 20th century, aged whiskeys did not really become part of the marketplace until the latter part of the 20th century. That's correct. It wasn't until the 1950s, early 1960s that aged whiskey became marketable and commercial. Prior to that, most of what the whiskey industry, the single malt whiskey industry, was producing were producing product for the blenders. And that goes back to the 19th century. Blended whiskey was the engine that was driving the industry, but blenders can't make their whiskey without us providing them with the liquid to drive that engine. All the way through up until World War II. World War II, all the distilleries shut down. Some stayed open for the war efforts, producing some industrial alcohol. We at Laphroaig actually had military personnel on site. So Bessie Williamson was entrusted to protect from the military to make sure that they were unable to get into the warehouses and take the precious liquid that was still aging in the warehouses during what we like to call the long sleep, the maturation process. So all of these whiskeys and all the distilleries during World War II are sitting, lying dormant, but the whiskey is still aging. And then by the late 1950s, early 1960s, a couple of the distilleries decided to start promoting single malt as a category. And so that was when the likes of Glenlivet, Glenfiddich started promoting their aged whiskey, which they'd had prior to World War II. So there was some 18, 20, 25-year-old whiskeys, and they promoted it as exclusive. Yes, it is more exclusive because there is less of it due to the evaporation. Is it better? Not necessarily so, but it is rarer liquid due to that evaporation. So prior to that, we were using casks that we were not monitoring the age as closely. When you look at the likes of Laphroaig, we were bottling our whiskey prior to World War II, and you'd see on the labels it would say something like unblended Scotch whiskey, which meant that it single malt didn't exist at that time, the category, but it was a marriage of different barrels from different years. The 10-year is a recipe that has been around for 100 years now. But no age statement whiskies really give us an opportunity to play around with different maturations, but that's also, we're doing the same thing with aged whiskey as well. We're using a combination of different barrels to create a consistency of flavor. One of the biggest misconceptions is that single malt is only coming from a single barrel. Now, there are single barrel bottlings available, but for the most part, the industry is marrying different casks. And in the case of, say, 10-year, that's a marriage of 10, 11, 12, 13 plus aged whiskies. No age statement whiskey. By law, if we were to put an age statement on it, you have to put the age of the youngest whiskies in the bottling. But that does not mean younger does not necessarily mean that it is inferior. It's just a different style. And in fact, we at Laphroaig really enjoy the younger style Laphroaigs because that's where the flavors really shine. So the likes of Laphroaig Quarter Cask uses younger whiskies, as well as Laphroaig Select. It allows us, it gives us a larger palette to choose from in terms of those flavors, to give us a wider range of flavors and styles.
Thanks very much, Simon. So, John, Simon touched on this a little bit with regards to the quarter cask and how it's produced. However, how does the size of the cask affect the flavour, and why did you decide to use these quarter casks?
I guess I'll answer the second question first, is that it was just something that was historically used, and when we were doing the quarter cask, which is, well, the experiments for quarter cask were around the millennium. And sorry, I'm looking to my left here because I've got a bottle of quarter cask. So the non-age statements weren't a thing then, and Laphroaig quarter cask was one of the first non-age statements to be produced in the Scotch whisky industry. So we looked to innovate and to try different things. As you said, it's the bit of my job that everyone thinks I'm doing all the time. It's just experimenting, pulls bungs out of casks, standing in a warehouse all day, and I really wish it was, but it's not. But we do a big piece of work on innovation and trying things, because we really do need to understand the liquid and how it works and how it moves, and you just want to know everything about it. So we just started off, we'll innovate, we'll try different casks from the past. Quarter casks were used in the mid-1800s, so in the 19th century, and they were basically used as a transportation vessel. And then when they would get, say, from Islay or the Highlands to the towns, Glasgow or Edinburgh, they would sit on the end of the bar and the liquid would change. So that's, we always tried to innovate through the past with these casks. The size of the cask then, because they're quarter casks, 125 litres, you have much more surface area and less liquid. So the cask influences quicker, I guess is the best way to say that. Whereas if you're using an original sherry cask or butt, they would be, especially for Laphroaig, that will be the casks that you'll use for maturing for like the 25-year-old. So that the cask slowly influences and you get that evaporation and you get that, I guess, oxidization inside the barrels, so that we produce these new and unique flavours. But because it's a bigger cask, the Laphroaig heart is still in there, so it doesn't change too much, because it's one of the things when you're producing a new Laphroaig that everyone will link that back to the 10-year-old, which is 70% of our sales. So you always have to keep these factors in place for both the maturation and equally for innovation as well. So we tend to try and innovate through our past, especially with quarter cask.
Okay, so thanks very much, John, and thank you, Simon. In the last but not least session, we'll be discussing our recommendations on the best way to enjoy Laphroaig. So pour yourself a dram and join us for our final session.